all genders who are trying to help make technology a more friendly place for women. And I am very excited to welcome you to our first panel event. And I am so pleased to have all of our panelists here tonight. I just let you know that we were supposed to have a fourth panelist, Janelle Klein, who is CTO at New Iron, but she has come down with the flu, which we hope that she gets better soon, but it's probably best for her to stay home. So there's food in the back. Please feel free to help yourself, drinks, and in the meantime, we'll just kind of get going. So I wanted to start by thanking WeWork for having this beautiful space and providing food for us. It's really wonderful to be here. Brand new, gorgeous offices. I encourage you to check out what they have to offer. It's a great community to be a part of, and they have a lot of options if you're looking for a workspace. And then I want to thank all of our panelists so much for taking time out of your busy days to come and share what you have learned with everyone who is attending today. So I want to just introduce each of the panelists if you haven't had a chance to check over their bios yet. So we start on the far end. Zeynep Young is the founder and CEO of Double Line Partners, a technology and services company focused on empowering teachers with data to monitor and improve student performance. Zeynep has led DLP from bootstrap to concept in 2009 to $18 million in revenues in 2014, with adoption in 24 states across the country. DLP is committed to making a positive impact in K-12 education and partners with private foundations and education agencies to share code and functionality to increase access to critical data for all teachers. In 2011, Zeynep led DLP through a successful acquisition and has stayed on as CEO post-acquisition. Prior to DLP, Zeynep managed $150 million grant portfolio for the Michael and Susan Dell Foundation and was an associate principal at McKinsey & Company. In 2014, she was a regional finalist for the ENY Entrepreneur of the Year Award and was named to the Forbes list of the Women Who Built Outstanding Companies. Zeynep has an MS in Management from Northwestern's Kellogg Graduate School of Management and a BS from Rice. Thank you, Zeynep, for being here. Next, we have Lori Knowlton, who is Chief People Officer at HomeAway, the worldwide leader in online vacation rentals. Since joining HomeAway in 2007, Lori has focused her energy on developing HomeAway's culture, recruiting top talent in the global marketplace, employee engagement, and global rewards. With over 1,800 employees in 13 countries, HomeAway has blended a strong culture of engagement with distinctive local operations. Lori has over 20 years of strategic HR leadership experience, ranging from multinational technology companies to early-stage startups, and holds a bachelor's degree from Bowdoin College in Brunswick, Maine. In her spare time, she is a mentor with Techstars Austin, scours eBay for mid-century deals, and enjoys time with her family. And to my left, we have Tina McDaniel Mendler, who currently leads the diversity, inclusion, and engagement initiatives for over 8,000 employees at Tesoro, a Fortune 75 energy company based in San Antonio. Before joining Tesoro, she worked for the global cloud computing company Rackspace Hosting. During her tenure with Rackspace, she helped the company grow from 800 employees to over 6,000 employees. Her primary focus was in the talent management space, covering talent acquisition, training, and launching Rackspace's diversity and inclusion program. Currently, she serves as the Vice President of Texas Diversity Council, San Antonio, and is involved in various women in leadership initiatives within the city of San Antonio. She also serves as a mentor to young professionals. Tina holds a bachelor's in business administration with a focus in human resources from the University of Texas at San Antonio. Welcome, Tina. I would like to start out by just inviting the panelists to sort of converse with one another, and I've prepared a number of questions based on the many questions that were submitted from you all who RSVP'd, and some that I just want to hear about for myself. And you all don't have to each answer every question, otherwise I think we won't get as far along as we'd like to. And then we'd like to save some time at the end so that you all can ask questions and we can have a more general conversation. Before we get started, I think Tina wanted to ask some questions of you, so we're going to flip it around for a minute.
Definitely just want to kind of level set, see who's in the room today. So appreciate all of you being here. So, a great group that we have here, and I love the diversity we've got in the room. We do have some men here, so thank you for being here. Really appreciate you being here. First, I just want to know who are is represented here. How many of you are working for a startup? If you're working for what we consider a small business, under about 100 people? Okay. What about a medium-sized business? Anybody in here? Medium-sized? Any large organizations, thousands of employees?
Millions.
Millions. Okay, good. All right, so more than the majority are startups. Okay, good. How many number of technical positions do you have available today? How many of you have 1 to 5? How many of you have more than 10? Okay, technical, so more than 10 technical roles? How many do you have?
How many technical roles?
Yes. How many technical roles? Open positions.
Well, we want to get to 50 by the end of the year. We have 30
Wow.
now.
Very cool. Okay, good. How many of you are currently serving in a technical role today?
Are any of you senior .NET developers that
Sorry. That's nice. Good to see you afterwards.
Exactly. .NET over here, database engineering over here.
How many of you are interested in moving into a technical role? Got one? Okay. All right, that helps me kind of well. So did y'all want to have any other questions? Can I figure out who else is in the room? Good. No?
That's super selfish.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you all.
I'm sorry, I guess I have a comment. So when I launched my startup, I specifically went out to seek out women talent for my company. So we actually had a balanced ratio. We had equal men, equal women, and we met in the middle. So I'm here to identify what is the problem? Why can't companies integrate this talent? So just wanted to share that with you.
Thank you.
I didn't even plant you to kind of so we know that only 26% of technology professionals are women, and many companies do struggle to hire women or get something that's close to even that 26% representative number. So I want to start out with just an initial question. How do you find qualified and interested women programmers for technical roles? And maybe a sort of broader question, how do you think we can attract more girls and women to the tech industry?
Sure. I think for us, we did not start my startup with the goal of having more, women or balance sort of through gender and other diversity indicators. What we did start off with was a woman VP of technology. And I think that really set us off on the path to success because as I noticed, many of you guys are here with a friend. And what I've noticed is friends recruit friends, and that's the best way to recruit talent. So initially, if your startup team looks diverse, as you build out the company, it looks more diverse because people reach out to their networks, especially if they like the place and they feel comfortable there as a woman, as a minority, as LGBT, then they're comfortable reaching out to their friends and recommending that workplace and pulling it there. And that's how we started off. I think very luckily with women technology VP. But I also think that the content of what you're doing matters, and I think we got very lucky because we're in K-12 education space, and I think that's a topic that's really near and dear to many people's hearts, including women. And so it's a compelling place to grab talent.
I mean, we don't have 26% of our very technical roles. I'm talking developers, database engineers, and so forth. As women, we're well below that at about 15%, which we're working on. But when we look at the whole company and the number of technical roles we have that are broader, like web analytics and our CRM roles and things like that, then we actually do get to about a 50-50 split. So I think that an interesting take on technology is to say, okay, where's your technology today, and where are your people today? Because I think you can take talent from other parts of your company and help them create technical careers, assuming they have a general analytical skill set. I mean, someone who's a program manager or a marketing CRM analyst could learn to code. if he or she wanted to. I do think that it's important to stay balanced in the whole conversation, and to the point about what your product is, how many people know about products that are only used by men or women? I mean, okay, so maybe feminine hygiene products should not have men designing them. We can all say that that would be a good idea. I mean, cars are driven by, men and women equally. Computers are used by men and women equally. Certainly, I think men and women are equally about their children's education, but the sort of teacher, profession has been predominantly female. So I think that when you're building a company and you're talking about your product, it really, obviously everybody's here because they value, that opinion, but really being able to put that out there when you're recruiting, saying, we need your perspective because you are the consumer that's going to use my product. There are very few products that wouldn't fall into that category, and it makes your business stronger and gives that value to the interview process.
A couple of things that come to mind, and I think going along those lines is the language that you have, whether it's in your job postings, on your career sites that you have them. Having more inclusive language speaks to not just women, but all kinds of talent, right? So the more inclusive that you can be in the language that you use, the bigger your talent pool is going to be. So not limiting yourself to that. And I think you need to find ways to look toward where are you being exclusive in your job requirements and things like that. What could you be excluding somebody who's a millennial or a baby boomer, right? You need diversity of all kinds. So looking at your language is one thing that I can give you advice on. The second is your interview panel. I think that is key as well. Having a diverse interview panel will help you bring in different perspectives in there as well. When you have just one mindset, you typically will start getting the same kind of talent coming in, but the more diverse your interview panel will be can also help you bringing in that diverse talent on your teams as well. To get more women in tech, I mean, we all know this problem's not going to be solved overnight. We're on a long journey. I always say it's not a race, it's a marathon. We're going to pace ourselves. It's going to take some time. And the STEM programs that are flourishing and really coming about these days is really going to help overcome the issues that we're facing today about getting women in tech. And it's about exposure. What are you being exposed to? What are the young girls today getting exposed to? I can give you an example. My niece wants to be a singer. So that's all she did. I think that's great. I think being a singer is fantastic. But, what are some other things that I can expose her to and watch her shape her thinking of what she wants to be when she grows up? So I think that'll help trying to get some more women in the pipeline as well.
So we had a question that came in around sort of picking up on this idea. If I'm a woman who's interviewing for a role at a technology company or even a technical role, should I talk about the fact that I'm a woman in technology, right? Is that going to be to my benefit? Is it going to be awkward? And I was thinking along those lines, and another question that came in, how you all kind of manage maybe some stigma around affirmative action, and sort of, what do you say to people who have a problem with that, especially in an industry that's so relentlessly focused on merit?
Yeah, I mean, we're not too far from the time when women just got coffee, right? I mean, one of my friends is the top salesperson at IBM, and her mom thinks that she's a secretary. So we're only, I kid you not, she has fabulous fingernails, but she's not a secretary. And she's also an engineer, so she's a SE for their messaging business, and she's, a multi-million-dollar earner for IBM, which is great, and IBM's, doing a lot to keep her, with flexibility and so forth. In terms of how we get there, I think that bringing up the fact that you're a woman in an interview is kind of obvious. It's like saying, "Hey, I speak English," So I think people can see, that you're a diverse candidate, and I think I want people to be able to see beyond that. I think that managers get a little bit freaked out when you talk about it in a way that might be aggressive. I think it's much better to be confident in yourself and then negotiate in a very neutral way and to make sure that you get what you're asking for during the offer process, and to be able to present your work in a very compelling and confident way. And I think that the manager is, if the manager is in the room with you and can hear your voice and can see you. They can see, that you are, a human being and that you are a certain gender and that you, have, hair of a certain, they know these things. I think that when people bring up gender, I think that a lot of managers, particularly traditional managers, start thinking, oh my goodness, am I going to get a discrimination case if I don't hire this person? In the same way, when I was pregnant looking for a job and I was like, well, should I tell anybody I'm pregnant? Then, I got the job and the CEO was like, wow, you're pregnant. I thought you were just getting fat. You're great. But the HR person was very cool about it because I talked to her about it and I said, hey, I'm 4 months pregnant. I do want this job and I'm serious about coming back. So I think that, the facts of your situation are more relevant if it's going to affect your ability to do the work. So I don't think that bringing up anything other than your ability to do the work is relevant. And then I think you should bring it up with the HR department. Say for example, you do have a chronic illness or you have, a special need or you have, some need for flexibility. Companies are very willing to work with those attributes in order to get top talent. But hiring managers, without the HR person saying it'll be okay, can get a little bit thrown by that. If you are the hiring manager, it would be good to say, okay, let me, do you plan to come back to work full time after you have your child? That's great. Let's work through that and actually get through the interview with, somebody who's planning to be a mom, and then think about, for your company, what amount of flexibility you might be able to afford for that person. I recommend a lot, because if that person's valuable, then it will come back to you 5 times over. So, that's how we deal with it, is to just, I wouldn't necessarily bring it up, but I wouldn't avoid it either. And if you do have a need, talk to the HR team about it, or if you're the hiring manager, educate yourself on, an appropriate reaction so that you can get the most out of the candidate.
So we know, in addition to the fact that there are not very many women in technology, one of the big problems is not just getting people in on entry-level positions, but keeping them. It's just over half of women in technology are leaving by mid-career. So what have you all found to be the most effective means of creating a workplace that's friendly to women and successfully keeps them around?
I'd say that's what I do all day. It's a full-time job. But I will say I work on building an inclusive environment for all employees. We do focus on women, we focus on veterans and all the other, but the main focus is building an inclusive environment for all employees. Top talent's hard to come by, and every company is in a war for talent. So every top talent that you have, you are going to want to maintain that talent. So if you're good at building an inclusive environment, then it will help that. But women specifically, so that's my speech there on inclusiveness. But women specifically, I think that it depends. It's very situational because all women are diverse, right? They're not one woman is the same, and we all have different needs at different times in our careers. So it does vary on that. I'm a new mom. I just had a child 4 months ago. So my need is very different than somebody who's single and not married, right? We have very different needs, and so being able to address those is important in your business, and making sure that you're offering programs or building policies that can really help all types of diverse talent. For us, we have built, both at Rackspace and at the company that I'm at, we built a network, an employee resource group for women. It is open to all employees, but it is geared towards women. The one that I did at Rackspace was led by men and women. The one while I'm at Tesoro is exclusively led by females. So it's giving women an opportunity to lead in places where they normally wouldn't have that opportunity. So they're able to lead events, and we're doing mentorship programs and educational events, you name it. And these women are leading it, where in their roles they wouldn't have an opportunity to lead. So we're giving them a platform to showcase skills that they normally wouldn't be able to do in their jobs. So that definitely helps them. One thing that I believe for all talent, right, the number one reason why everyone leaves their job is because of their manager. So I think having effective leaders in your business is critical to keeping top talent. And so making sure that doing any type of survey just to check in, see how employees feel about their managers, about their workspace is That is a critical thing that you can do, no matter how big or small your company is. Just getting that input and that feedback, just to check in, take a pulse in your environment and see how things are going. Find out who the managers are. Some people are great at leading process, and some people are great at leading people. And those that are not great at leading people probably shouldn't be in that position, because they're going to be opening the door, letting your talent just flood out of it, and you know, it can be very hazardous to your environment. So I would say, you know, doing a survey would definitely help you identify what's needed in your business from your talent. What do they want? What do they benefit? It's not always money. Sometimes it's flexible work arrangements. Sometimes it's, you know, being able to bring my kids into work every once in a while, or work from home. I mean, you name it. So it's up to your employees. It's what do they want? But there's no way for you to tell if you don't ask. And then the second thing is to make sure that you're really making sure that you have effective leaders in your business, and valuing that talent. I'll tell you, at Rackspace, we did everything we could. We did all these programs put in place to surround our women and show that we really supported them, and yet they still left. And the reason why is because they didn't feel valued in our organization, and that was the number one reason why they were leaving.
I do want to build on that, because I think that's absolutely right. I mean, as a really small company, we don't have those kinds of resources. We only have 70 people. So we don't have any initiatives that are meant to retain any specific, you know, person or group. But what we did early on, which worked really well, was to build a culture of inclusion, respect for debate, and sort of an obligation to dissent if we disagree, and an obligation to listen, and to really create a meritocracy of ideas, which is what we call it, rather than a hierarchy of people. And there were several really early episodes that that really gelled that for us. There was, very early on, we had 2 really senior architects who happened to be guys, and there was a much more junior architect as well who was a woman, and there was a really big disagreement about the technical architecture of a specific project. And she had very strong opinions about what that architecture should look like. And I think the guys were getting really tired of hearing her, and so there was a lot of frustration on the team. I think to complicate things, she was actually just wrong. I mean, that wasn't the best idea, unfortunately. I mean, it just happened that the more senior people had a lot more experience. But what we did, which was really powerful, was to say, we're gonna go through this whole discussion, right? Just because you have a lot more experience and you can already tell before somebody goes down that path that this is a crappy idea and that you don't want to waste your time listening to it, doesn't mean that we're not going to actually hear it, because you might not know where it's going. Or it might be wrong, but it might spark another idea, right? That diversity of opinion and the willingness and the respect to listen, and also teach people, right? I mean, if their thinking is wrong, one of the biggest things that we do is to really make sure that people are understanding where we're going and what the thought process of the really senior people are. And that was a really critical moment in our company to say, I mean, regardless of who the person is, we're gonna need to make sure everybody feels heard, because that's the way to get to the best ideas. Not because we're trying to be like touchy-feely or it's some kind of affirmative action thing. It's just you, even if you're the most senior person and you happen to be the, the CTO or the senior data architect, doesn't mean that you always have the best idea. And if you create a culture where people don't feel like they can be heard, then you're not going to get the best performance. And so I think that's been the biggest thing for us, for our employees who've chosen to stay with us, is being in that culture and not always being right and not always having their idea adopted, but always feeling heard and feeling respected.
Thanks. There was a question about salary negotiation and sort of encouraging women to negotiate. So I feel like this is a broader issue. We know that the gender salary gap is smaller in tech than in other industries, and I've seen at least one article arguing that it doesn't exist at all, which is great. But there are still challenges related to women who are sort of punished for assertive behaviors that are admired in men, or they're sort of seen as unlikable, and there's a lot of, I think, double bind that goes with those kinds of phenomena. So I was wondering how do you sort of promote general practices for fairness at your companies? And do you do any kind of training or have other approaches to bringing men and others on board in thinking about these kinds of problems?
Yeah, I mean, I do a lot of hiring, and one thing that I've noticed is that men and women negotiate very differently. I mean, very differently. And women are like, okay, I'll take it, when do I start? And men are like, well, you know, I'm gonna have to think about it, and you know, I need to have, you know, this and that. And that happens all the time. I'm talking junior men, senior women, junior, I mean, it happens all the time. And that's not necessary. I think that I've had senior women call me and say, yeah, you know, I was a vice president, but, you know, I take a director job. And I'm like, okay, I'm taking off my HR hat, I'm putting on my feminist hacker hat, and saying, you may not accept a job that is lower than what you're valued. So there's a part about putting your value on the table and saying, this is what I'm worth in the marketplace. And if you really want to be in the company and they don't have a job that meets your skills, then you can decide and maybe say, okay, well, I'll do this job, I'd probably do it in 20 hours a week. Would you like me to do this job in 20 hours a week? And then you could have some flexibility to go, you know, pursue your own interests the other part of the time. You know, think about optimizing. I do think that it is a problem because, you know, when I look at my managers and I say, what's going on? They're like, well, she didn't ask for a raise. I don't care. She's a top performer, you give her a raise, end of discussion. You know, and so we do a lot of work with key and critical. You know, we look very much at diversity when we're doing our key and critical because we want the balance to be there. Obviously, we're not going to put a non-performer in the mix of a key and critical person. You know, just like, you know, just because you're diverse doesn't mean you're always right. You know, there are performance and development opportunities for everybody, also for managers. From the just administrative perspective, I look at every job and run the analysis for every job on whether or not we have disparate impact when we do give increases. So a good practice to get into, you know, when you're looking at your employee population is to give all of your increases at the same time so that you're not sort of saying, okay, well, we'll do one in December and we'll do one in, you know, November and we'll do one in September. Because then you kind of forget, you know, was I in a good mood that day? Was money flowing? Was I feeling stressed? Because those things influence your decisions no matter who's in front of you. But if you can do them all at once, then you can look at your organization and say, who are my high performers? Who do I want to retain? You know, and you know, who really needs to grow? So I need to deliver a message through pay that's different. And then you can look at your trends and you can say, am I, you know, allowing, you know, a discriminatory behavior to take place here because I'm not pushing it aggressively from the other side? Because I do believe that women need to ask, you know, for what their value is. There's a book called The Confidence Gap that says that men are happy to accept a job when they're 60% competent and women feel like they have to be 90% competent. I see it all the time. I think that's something that is part of our culture, but I think that women can take more risks. I think that women can ask for more money. I mean, the worst thing that can happen is somebody can say no, right? But at least you've asked, and not asking is a guaranteed no, you know, to you know, get a non-response unless your manager is sort of psychic and thinks that.
It's not always just pay that you can negotiate as well. I mean, there are stock options, title, bonus. You don't have to go for the 10%. You can ask for the 15% bonus. Ask for something. Going with nothing is you're not going to be getting anything, right? It's kind of like that saying, the squeaky wheel gets the oil, right? So make sure you're always negotiating something. I can tell you from the HR side, there's always a little bit that there's an opportunity there for you to negotiate, and it's the confidence to be able to do that. I can tell you, I didn't have it when in my first career going in. I didn't negotiate. It was something that I learned and built confidence to do, and now I'm like, no, it's expected. It's like, no, we're gonna negotiate, and I'm always gonna try to always keep raising the bar and raising my value raises, and so is kind of the input that I'm getting from employers as well. It needs to match that because you learn something every day. Your knowledge, your experience, and your value goes up every day, and so the rewards you're getting should match that. You know, and so if you're not negotiating, you don't ask, then you may not receive that. So it's all about building the confidence to do that. And I promise you, the first time is going to feel a little uneasy to go out there and ask for it. The second time is too. I can promise you that, but by the third or fourth time, you're going to be a pro at it. It's just doing it and getting practice with it.
Yeah, I would agree. That's consistent with my experience as well. That women candidates ask for less, and they're more tentative. And there's always room for negotiation because that's what managers are expecting to negotiate a little bit. And nobody is ever, if you put it in the right way, which I'm sure 99% of the people in the world do, nobody's going to say, well, you want $10,000 more, I withdraw my offer. I mean, you know, you can still have a graceful way of saying, even if they say, no, this is firm, there's no room for negotiation, you could gracefully say, well, let me think about it because I think this is a great and really compelling job, just a little different. You know, so you can still accept the job. I mean, you don't have to come to an impasse. But the one advice that I would give is the entry point is really important. So if I have a developer coming in at 110, and then somebody else really is negotiating hard and we need somebody, they come in at 150, I'm not going to turn around. I mean, we're a really small company. You're not going to get a $40,000 raise even if you're a good performer. So be thinking about the jumps, because that's where you get the biggest, right, jump in your seniority and your experience level and your pay level. So don't be shy about looking for that next big step. And don't be shy about negotiating those. I find that once you're in a company, budgets are more of a consideration, you know. So that's where you really need to negotiate, is that entry point.
Yeah. Now, it's going to take about 3 years for you to get to the next level of engineering once you start a company. And when you're early in your career, say, you know, under 100K, you can jump 15 to 20% per year. Not necessarily by changing companies, but just by being on a trajectory, right? I mean, we're talking about small dollars. You know, if you're at 50K, you know, you should be able to get to 60K a lot easier than being at, you know, 140K and getting to 170K. You know, so once you get above the 120K mark, then things start to flatten in terms of your base pay growth. But then you can grow bonus significantly, particularly if it's associated with company performance. You know, I'm helping you succeed, and equity becomes a much larger component. You know, once you're in the senior engineering ranks, and other things. You know, like vacation and, you know, 30-hour weeks or flexible work schedules. All of those things are things that are virtually free, you know, for the company to provide, and are things that can make your quality of life pretty awesome.
So picking up on something that Tina was mentioning a minute ago, sort of, in my experience, there's often a critique level when we talk about women in tech that what we really mean is white women in tech, right? And so it could be any of a variety of privileged identities. So obviously diversity is larger than just women. So with that in mind, are there particular diversity metrics that you track in your company? And how do you measure those, and how often do you kind of check in on them to see how you're doing?
Wow. There's a lot of metrics that we measure. We measure what our pipeline looks like. So, and we're looking at, I mean, we measure white males as well. If you're in the healthcare industry, it's dominated by females. So they have a totally different diversity challenge than tech, and I'm now in oil and gas. So tech and oil and gas are very similar issues that we face, but we measure who's coming in, who are we attracting, and then we're measuring who we're interviewing, and then who we hire. Then we're also tracking who's getting promoted, who's transferring, who's leaving. We also track employee engagement. We track there's a lot of different metrics. We do check those, it depends on what we're tracking. We check that differently. Our employee engagement survey we do every other year, so that's something that we don't check annually. Our pipeline, we do quarterly, so we're kind of just checking in for different positions. We're checking those quarterly. And then the rest of them are pretty much annually. Who we're hiring, who's leaving, what the promotion rates, those we're tracking annually.
We do track that. Although I have to say, given how tight the talent market is in Austin, and how difficult it is to grab really senior, great developers, we're not turning anybody away or pulling anybody in because of diversity. We're trying to get the best and the brightest in the door. It's not that we're not reaching women developers because we don't want them, it's just there happen to be fewer of them in the market. But we do look at that. We especially look at once people are in the door, whether their salary bands are consistent across, multiple diversity factors, and whether their experience and their promotion track is similar to other candidates who had similar experience.
Yeah, we're drinking out of a fire hose too. And I'm particularly upset when people leave. When anybody leaves, I'm like, okay, fine, they weren't performing. Like I like them. So I think turnover is a big deal. Obviously, the market is hot. I think that the town that you're in makes a big difference also. I think that, when I go to our international offices, London, for example, incredibly diverse city. We have an incredibly diverse workforce there. I used to work in Atlanta. We had an incredibly diverse workforce in Atlanta. Austin, not so diverse. It's just demographically, it's a unique city that way. So I think that we do have to make some extra efforts to entice people to move to Austin and to create more diversity throughout the entire Central Texas area. Because I think Houston and San Antonio, have great diversity, but people haven't necessarily moved to the hill country yet.
Who is sort of ultimately responsible for the diversity of the company where you are? Is it, maybe it's a CEO, maybe it's someone who has this particular diversity role, depending on the size of where you're at. And then sort of, who would you describe as the main folks who make sure that diversity is a priority for your company?
I would definitely say it starts at the top. So it starts with leadership and their commitment for diversity and the need for it. It's different, the way that looks with leadership. The CEOs that I've worked under, it's been different. Why they value it and why they feel like it's important. If it's not coming down from the top, then the tone's different, and it's not a priority. It's not something that you focus on. So I would say definitely at the top, the owners who are measuring and checking in to see how well the organization is doing to attract a diverse workforce and retain that diverse workforce, it resides in HR. Both organizations that I worked in, and in both we had diversity and inclusion programs there, so it was me that was responsible for that. But I definitely did see the leadership. There was a commitment from leadership, and so it was kind of set the tone of the whole organization that it was important. So it wasn't just Tina's responsibility within the organization. Tina helps, and she's there to support and create programs for you that if you need help attracting a certain type of talent, I can tell you where to go get it and help you market them and write kind of that communication promotional things. I'm there to support you. I'm your support, your backbone, but it is ultimately everyone's responsibility within the company, and that came down from leadership.
Yeah, same here. And people have to be visible about it. And our co-founders just wrote a letter to Greg Abbott, about the rules, in Indiana and potential things that are being considered here. And they're very vocal about it. I actually think it's very helpful if your executives are able to demonstrate and role model the valuing diversity. A lot of executives have family members who are diverse. A lot of executives are in mixed race marriages. A lot of executives have children with disabilities. A lot of executives have a lot of diversity in their families. And so the thing that I talk about a lot is to not just talk to your daughters about engineering, but to talk to your sons about the fact that women are good at math. Not just say, okay, my son with a disability is going to go to this school and then, we're going to figure out what to do with them. It's like, no, he's going to get a job and he's going to support himself and, he'll be valuable to some company. Let's, talk about how that works. And, he might not be president of the United States. That might not be, his chosen path, but everybody has a social connection in their life that is diverse, and being able to bring that to the workplace brings a lot of humanity into the conversation that is quite useful.
No, I would agree. I think it does start at the leadership, but also I think it rings pretty hollow if your leadership team looks pretty uniform. I mean, it's easy to pay lip service about how much you care about diversity, but if your entire VP, SVP, and CEO suite looks like white guys, I think people feel that that's not very genuine, because there are a lot of diverse candidates to date that have earned the right to be there. So I think that as you grow your companies, you should be fostering that, and for the companies where you're evaluating working, I think that's a great indication of whether they're putting their money where their mouth is. You know, if they're all about diversity, but there's no female managers, or they're, right, I think that rings pretty hollow.
So maybe as sort of a closing question for me, and we can open up to everyone. Clearly you're all here because you think this is really important. But not everyone is sort of on board. And so have you had experience or situations in which there's someone that you have managed to sort of like help bring around on some of these things? What have you found to be sort of effective strategies for talking to people who maybe are not as open to some of these ideas?
I mean, I think the question is where their bias resides. I know that the tech market's awesome and hot, but a lot of the male engineers I know are not necessarily socially competent. I'm just saying. They're not the life of the party. They've been rejected by women for years. I'm just saying. I married one. But I think the question is, are you hiring this person because they look like you, because they went to your school, because you want to go have a beer with them? That old adage that's been in high tech for 20 years needs to go away. A lot of people don't drink beer. A lot of people are gluten-free. I mean, that's not the criteria for building a good workforce. And so I think that understanding the hiring manager's bias, or understanding the bias of the company, what is their true intent? I mean, there's a certain element of fear. I'm afraid if I, hire a woman that she's going to go have 5 babies, and, I'm never going to get any work out of her. I know. Women have babies. Oh my goodness. I think that there is a fear of, how's the team going to get along? I think there's a fear on the part of candidates of how am I going to fit in, because there's so much media about the geek culture, in Silicon Valley and so forth. So I think that breaking down the geek culture and saying that that is, very uncool is where we start. And saying that the inclusive culture isn't the frat boy culture. It isn't, sort of the, Dungeons and Dragons after work, sort of culture, because that's not what attracts a diverse workforce. Of course, people can still play Dungeons and Dragons, but it's not part of the hiring criteria. What's your sport? I think it alienates people. And so I think that when you think about where someone's making decisions from, assume that they're imperfect and assume that they're trying to do the best job, and then give them some good ideas. I've been able to break through a lot of stereotypes by just putting incredibly talented people together that are incredibly different and be like, who knew? Wow, you guys actually get along and you like each other, and I'm like, oh, wow, and so it's about experience. People learn through experience. If you do have someone who's uncoachable, and you have someone who has no empathy and is not able to operate in a diverse environment, fire them. You cannot have that in your environment. You cannot have a role model. You cannot promote them. You cannot give them raises. You cannot reward them because they do not stand for your values. And they'll be happy someplace else. But you'll be constantly struggling with them. They'll be constantly struggling with you. And it sets a bad example for everybody else.
I would just say definitely fire jerks. I mean, they really, it's not just about having fun in the office, because I'm not paying anybody to have fun in the office. It's really that they're destroying business value for your business. Because they're alienating key talent, they're creating tension in the office, they're getting people to think more about personality conflicts rather than the work that people should be doing. And so it's really critical that people jump on that right away among any dimension. I think the other ways that, Austin is a really young town. I think tech is really young, the startup scene is really young. And we're not seeing, at least for us, we're not seeing the kind of sort of antiquated Mad Men type of, oh, we can't have a woman working here attitudes. I think it's more about sort of things that are subconscious, that you think when you interview someone that they are so much better than the other person you interviewed. Right? right? And so we specifically seek to have objective content put into our interviews so we can test people's skills rather than, whether you want to go have a beer with them, because I'm definitely not paying anybody to have beers with anybody else. Everybody does that on their own time. So we really want to make sure that that interview process is objective. And if we failed and we brought in somebody who is causing a lot of organizational angst, we get rid of that person pretty quickly. We fired a very, very senior, super fantastic .NET developer, which is a big pain point in Austin.
Painful.
So we tried so hard to recruit those folks because he was being a jerk to a bunch of people in the office and just creating more headaches than it was worth. So you have to bite the bullet on that, even though the talent is really tight.
I think that kind of helping someone that doesn't get it. They probably haven't thought about it, and you have to sit down. It's more of the education and awareness, and how do they define diversity? And I guarantee you, most of the time when I say, well, tell me how to define diversity, it's gender and it's race. And diversity is more than that. We talk about diversity of thought, things like that. And so whenever I'm talking with a manager, it's just like, I just don't understand this. Why do I, need to hire females, or why do I need to hire, someone who's not like me? And it's kind of, I talk about what is the needs on your team? What's your skills gaps that you have on your team? And again, it goes back to diversity of thought and making sure that you're hiring a well-rounded team, because you don't want to hit brick walls when you're going in there trying to brainstorm or come up with solutions. You want to have that diverse team so you can beat your competition, right? That's what it comes down to. Is we all have competitors in every space that we're in, and the more diverse minds that you can get wrapped around a problem, and we all know this, right? The more ideas that come out of this. And so usually that's the way that I can get to people who don't get it, is through innovation. That you can't argue with. So most of the time that's kind of where I lead it when we get there.
Thank you all so much. So I'd love to open it up to questions.
I have a question, and this is like a little bit more towards the other side of the coin. So we've been talking a lot about the women's side of things, and everyone's kind of seeing all the NBA and ESPN commercials of lean in together and all that. So what are you guys doing to help the other side, the males, be able to feel comfortable taking off and being that 50%? Because let me give you an example. If you've got, like, I work in a very progressive industry, which, if a man wanted to walk in the office and say, hey, I've got to go pick up my children, no big deal. My husband works in a very old school industry, very similar to oil and gas. There's only one industry that's probably worse, and it's oil and gas, right? And non-diverse, his peers don't ask off to do, things that typically, normally, the women used to do all the time. How are you guys, helping that side of the coin? So, because that actually brings flexibility to the other side of the fence as well.
Yeah, I mean, we have paternity leave in addition to maternity leave. We do 12 weeks of paid maternity leave here in the U.S., and I think we're at like 2 to 4 weeks of paternity leave. I can't remember. So we're very supportive of dads spending time with their children. You can tell that the flexible work is working because people show up at 7 a.m. and people leave at 3, and they're going to soccer and they're coaching this. We also set up donation days that people can use for family and charity events. So, if they want to go paint their kids' school, or they want to go support, their favorite charity, they can use this time off to do that, and it's not considered vacation time or sick time or personal time. And some of the things are just in your policies. And if you've got a sick time policy, let people use it for their children. Children are homesick all the time. Adults may or may not get sick that much. Make it a family sick policy. And if your kid is sick, you can't take them to school, then let the parent use a sick day to stay with them, because they're certainly not going to be productive, when the kid is, either, sitting underneath your desk, with a fever, or, when they're trying to work from home and, trying to take care of the child at the same time. So there are a lot of things that you can do, and some of these are super administrative and easy. I mean, nobody in your company will notice if you say sick time applies for when your kid's sick, but the person who needs it, when their child started vomiting at 5 a.m. will appreciate it tremendously. And those words travel fast.
Sure, let's jump.
Okay. Obviously, you've mentioned women don't negotiate the same as men. Obviously, when some women don't seek promotions, and some of us that are perhaps more savvy are actually interested in pursuing careers at companies that actually have female in management positions. And so my question to you is, how do you balance the CMOs that are females and the chiefs of people or human resources that are only women, where there are women qualified that have technical sales or business development that are non-traditionally female-oriented roles in your organization?
Just want to make sure I understand that question. So it is, how are we balancing the diversity in non-traditional female
In your management team?
and management team? Okay, again, I think it's commitment, and that's coming from, again, it's your leadership team. If they value it and they have that commitment, then it will become a priority. I had the pleasure of working under probably one of the best CEOs, I think, in my career, and him and I had a phone conversation once, and he said, I said, I don't think diversity and inclusion is valued by some in our organization, and in some minds I think that we're failing. And he said, well, Tina, if I don't talk about it, it's not important. And my leadership team is not going to feel like it's important. And he said, so I need to start talking about it. And I guarantee you people will start focusing on it. And if it's coming, I cannot stress that enough, if it's not coming from your leadership team, then it won't be important. Whatever they're voicing is what's going to be important. That's going to be the tone in the environment. So it's very important for leadership to get the business case as to why we're doing it. On an HR side, what we try to do to balance it is, as we're going through and we're doing our succession planning or we're doing our talent reviews, we're always asking the question about the diversity. And we look at it and we're saying, okay, you have all men here because you're about to promote it. What's going on with the females in your team? And we're asking and putting those checks and balances in place in our organization. So as an HR side, we are the support, we're kind of the checks and balances. So you've got the leadership commitment, voicing how important that is. You've got HR being your checks and balances, and it really kind of helps shape what your management team looks like. You do have to watch it, and you do have to measure it, because it can happen real fast. Individuals promote people that typically remind you some quality of yourself, and I've had that with bosses. Tina, you remind me of myself when I was younger, and those are the bosses that have just excelled my career. And so that typically happens. It's just human nature. We surround ourselves by like-minded individuals. So you do need to have some checks and balances. It is human nature. So you need some way to kind of make sure that you're breaking that up and that you do. It's a practice. This is a practice. Making sure you have diversity in your organization. It is a practice, and you have to practice it every day.
I mean, just like the STEM programs in the schools, we go through the organization, and we're not just looking at the people who are up for promotion because they're already visible, and saying, okay, who could be a future CEO somewhere? And it might be, her own startup or something like that. Who is, a future CTO? Because, there are people who just have leadership qualities, and there are people that you can see, even if they're, 3 years out of school, you can tell, that the characteristic, and they're in your high potential group, and making sure that you have those in play at every level, and that you're retaining them and bringing them up through your organization is important. And that's where you can get a lot of hands around the people who might opt out, if that's not there. But one thing that I would caution you about on looking at sort of the executive roster to see how many women are on it. This sort of goes to Sheryl Sandberg. Not all women are nice, and not all women believe in diversity. I think that I think there was a woman that I heard just last week. I don't know, somewhere here in Texas, who said, "Well, a woman can't be president. We're emotional." Like, okay, she is not working in my company. I'm like, you know what? I might get emotional. It's for a very good reason. And it has a hell of a lot of value, damn it. And so, and that could work. It doesn't seem to be a problem for Germany. They're doing quite well. So I think that I think that assuming that the women who are successful are going to be promoters of women, it's not necessarily a true correlation. I do think that you can look through a LinkedIn profile on a company and you can see sort of what the ratios are. And, search for, go into advanced search and search for directors and vice presidents, a small company, see what they look like. That'll tell you what the general practice is, in the company. Their pictures are all right there.
Yeah. That's it.
How does a team full of able-bodied white men convince people who are not able-bodied white men to join their team? How do you attract that talent? How do you do it?
Maybe we should ask a white man.
I think it's something that you value. It goes back to, the conversation about building that inclusive environment and the language that you have. I know a couple of startups in San Antonio that are predominantly white male founders, and they have very diverse teams, but it's because they made an effort to build the diverse team and look for that. And again, it's effort and practice and making sure that you're inclusive in your language, that, when you interview a candidate, and if it's inclusive and it's a partnership that you can have, they're not gonna say no. They're gonna be thriving to get in your environment and work for you. But I think it's putting the effort around it.
I think a lot of it's money. I mean, and feeling wanted. I mean, if you're going to do university recruiting, which is where we find our best balance, of engineers and sort of young talent, you are going to have to pay more for, a great black candidate out of Carnegie Mellon than you'll have to pay, for a white guy on UT. You're just going to have to, because Google wants them, Facebook wants them, IBM wants them, Microsoft, so it's a competitive market. And I think that for candidates, there's a little bit of, challenge there, of inflation of ego, for university people. But there's part of, what's your value prop for that person, and how much do you want them on your team? And you can't just want them because they're diverse. You have to want them, because you want them to, really join, your family in that kind of a way. So being sincere about the practice is important. And I've, always been leery of managers who are like, well, okay, I need to check the box, I've heard stories like, oh, we're going to bring in the diversity candidate. This diversity candidate gets, brought in for like 9 interviews. It's like, nope, we interviewed a diverse crew. It's like, well, if you're not going to hire the diverse candidate, stop bringing them back in. And this happens at a company that starts with D and ends with L, located just north of here. But I've heard that. So be genuine in your intentions. You want to build the best team. And there's a reason that person would add value to your team, and they will hear it in your voice. They will see it in your offer. They will see it in what you're doing, and then you'll be able to bring in, the genuine reason for diversity as opposed to the political reason for diversity. Because the politics will probably blow up, and then they'll like, see, you were right, you shouldn't have hired that woman to begin with.
A super personal aside, my company is actually owned by Michael Dell, and I have to say that as a person, he's incredibly supportive of women entrepreneurs and has done a lot to promote that through Dell Women's Entrepreneur Network and Duane and all the global events that they do. So just a totally personal plug, because
I don't know Michael Dell personally. I just know HR people at Dell.
HR people. No, but I mean, just to go back to your question, go where the candidates are. Look, if I'm looking for a .NET person, I go where the .NET people are. I don't wait them for just to magically show up at my door. So if I'm looking for an internationally diverse workforce, because that's really important for my product, my company, or gender diversity is important for certain reasons, that's where you go to get those candidates. They don't magically show up.
Well, along the lines of that, my company has been, is like 5 years old now, and we haven't hit double digits of women dev advocates. And it's a pretty diverse, in general, the whole company is pretty diverse. The only department that's lacking is our dev team. So I think we're trying to revamp our recruiting video and all that stuff, but is there anything else we can do? I guess be a little more involved in the women's community here.
Network.
Yeah.
We just go through LinkedIn. We get everybody to go through their LinkedIn. We say, this is what we're looking for. Who do you know? Why don't we bring that person in, right? Again, among all dimensions. because the networks are the way to bring people in.
Yeah, it works both ways in terms of, people who are good know people who are good. And so
Exactly.
they trust the employees who are already there and say that you're a good place to work. But go to meetups, go to, different, sort of push yourself out into, the user groups, and to look for things like that. I mean, I have a mommy's group that I know that is all, sort of Ivy League MBA women. Because, they're hanging out with their 1-year-olds, and I'm like, well, what am I going to do when I go back to work? And that's the perfect time to pluck them away from an employer who doesn't appreciate it. When they're at home saying, wow, look at how beautiful this baby is, and how am I going to go back to my 60-hour-a-week job?
So you talked a lot about how to build a really inclusive and diverse environment, but I'm wondering how you learned how to do that. What was kind of your process of understanding how to build that through books, through training, through other people in this field? I'm really interested in that.
I got very lucky because I worked at McKinsey really early on in my career, and what they do really well, and not necessarily because of a diversity perspective, but they really create that culture of the meritocracy of ideas and the obligation to dissent and the obligation to listen. And that was such a great experience because I think fundamentally people just want to be heard and appreciated, not shut down and be told by a boss, like, this is how we're going to do it. And so that was really for me a formative experience that I've tried to replicate every other place that I've worked.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever read a book on diversity. I think that there's a very human part, to the workplace that people forget about, but you spend a lot of your time there. And I think it's really about life experience, and people get better at it, the more experiences they have. Remembering that everybody is human, really makes the workplace a better experience. And when it's too business and it's too, much hierarchy and it's too much, my way or the highway, then it's going to break.
I read lots of books on diversity. Looking through the opposite. Yes, I'm the opposite where we balance each other. I've gone through 2 formal training programs about diversity as well, and every year I try to, the Society of Human Resource Management, we call it the Mecca for diversity and inclusion professionals. They offer a conference annually. Everything you need to know about diversity is there. There's other conferences as well, but that's absolutely my favorite to go there. It's like going to therapy, because there's other D&I practitioners there, and we all go in the room, and it's like, you get it. I don't have to preach anymore. You just get it, and so it's nice. So definitely reading a ton of books on diversity. There's the Diversity Inc. is a great resource as well for diversity and inclusion related topics. Just constantly staying plugged into that field. Diversity Inc. is a good resource. There's NCWIT, which is the National Center for Women in Information Technology. Wonderful resource. Their resources are free to use. So if you go online, they have mentorships in a box. There's 10 ways to advocate for women in technology. They're just tons of resources. And a lot of companies, Intel, Google, Facebook, Amazon, all collaborate together to put together these resources, and they're free to everyone. So definitely that's where I learned it, and then through experience. I've been doing D&I for almost about 7 years now, and so you learn a lot just on the job, and from the other is my network. I surround myself by other diversity and inclusion experts, and we're always learning from each other, so always learning, always learning.
So you also mentioned a lot about commitment from management for diversity. How about changing or instilling that change from upper management? And at some point, I don't know if it was Zeynep or Lori who mentioned organizational angst, for example, that a person can create with this. Have you ever, for example, made the case, say, if I take X amount of minutes with this organizational angst opposed to valuable work, or something along those lines, something more practical as to, to demonstrate how necessary it is
Yes, I have taken a lot of time when I think that the situation is coachable and manageable and correctable. I will say something super counterintuitive and maybe not popular. If you are working at a place where you have to convince upper management that diversity and inclusion is important, you should look for a different job. Because you do not need to be running up against that brick wall. I think that those kinds of social changes are sweeping the country, and that's awesome. But there's no reason why people should waste valuable years trying to combat that kind of thing. So I would not, I as a CEO have spent time with my management team and with specific people correcting behaviors that we don't think create a culture of inclusion. And some people have changed their ways, some people have gotten fired. But I would not stay at a place where I had to convince the upper management that I reported into to be more inclusive.
Right, I agree.
So we've got like our task force, and we're trying to create these good empathetic conversations among colleagues, and all these great programs we're coming up with. The biggest problem that I just cannot figure out how to directly address is things like soft sexism or soft racism, where you can't really prove anything. Maybe they were just crabby, but enough times during the day can really make your coworkers get kind of beat down and maybe call in sick the next day because they don't want to deal with it. How would you approach those kinds of problems?
Well, I was at Zappos and I saw this really great poster and said if it's really that funny, it's probably harassment. Oh my God. And I said, wow, that is the best HR human poster I've ever seen in my entire life. So I recommend buying some of those.
I think there's a lot of funny things that aren't sexist.
I know, but people can see the difference, right?
Yeah.
So, if you've got, the poster up there, it's not, sort of being big brother-ish, and people are like, oh yeah, I was joking about something that wasn't sexist or racist, and it was still really funny. People totally know what you're talking about. You do not need to spell it out for them.
I think what's been successful for us is just approaching it as a people problem rather than a woman or a race problem. Just having a conversation with somebody saying, I just noticed you throughout the week shutting down people, right, who are trying to bring new ideas to the table, or being really grumpy when people are asking for help. And that's not creating a great culture, and it's not helping us get work done. So rather than just being like, I think you're a sexist, it's just like, why would you, I don't want you to snap at anybody, really, and I don't want you to turn away anybody that is seeking help from you. And so really trying to coach people on what a desirable behavior, like person behavior is, rather than trying to assign a label to it, has been effective for us.
There is, you can find all kinds of things about micro inequities, and you can find articles on it, you can find e-learning and things like that. We do have a lot of training in place about micro inequities. It's little subtle things that happen that build and can have huge consequences. And so we do a lot of training on micro inequities. The other thing I will say is there's two things. If an individual is comfortable enough to confront the person and kind of let them know that I don't appreciate those comments, or please don't say that around me. A lot of people aren't comfortable with that. It's kind of confrontational, and so providing a safe place for your employees to go to bring up those issues, and making sure that there's no retribution that's going to happen to them if they go, right? There's no tolerance for anybody that's going to come back and say anything, but creating that safe environment where employees can, we're at Rackspace, there's a saying that's called take it to the wrecker, and that's taking it to the individual, and so you tell people all the time, take it to the wrecker. People come to HR and say, have you taken it to the wrecker first? And, they'll tell us, no, I'm not comfortable with it, so we'll help kind of figure out ways, well, how can we, address that? Because it's something that may be small and subtle, but it causes huge implications. And so creating that safe environment, and then, coaching or giving people some confidence to maybe they can go handle it themselves and address it and have the coworkers work it out between each other.
I'm trying to create a startup that involves robot pets. And I'm building out my team, and I sent out pretty widely these job descriptions. And I need a really broad skill set because it's hardware and software, and so I was fairly ambitious in the breadth of skills that I was looking for. I even heard from a couple people that, oh, you're not going to find someone with all these skills. And I did end up getting like 30 responses from people, which I'm really happy with, but there were 0 females out of those 30. And like in my experience actually, like I come from academia in computer science, but like with a human interaction component. And when there's human interaction, in my experience, there's actually way more females than like traditional computer science. So I was really shocked that I got 0 females. And I know that like, you know, we can talk about the confidence gap, and I've also heard that men are more likely to respond to job descriptions when they don't fit all the characteristics. And so that might have something to do with it. But I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on just speculation on why that might have happened. Maybe it's just random.
No, I think you're right on. I mean, first of all, I think that the women that you want to hire are probably very well employed. And so they're probably not looking for a job. You're going to have to go find passive candidates. You know, maybe they're in academia, maybe, you know, they're happy at, you know, a robotics company someplace else. And given that the sort of engineering population that you're looking at to begin with, chances are good that they're busy doing something else. So go find them. And since you do have the experience in, you know, the human interaction space, I would go back to your academic settings, start networking with professors, look at other entrepreneurs. You know, maybe somebody, you know, just left a company, maybe somebody's just starting a company, maybe somebody's just completing their PhD. You know, they could be great, a great place for you to network in to find that talent. I mean, they're busy, you know.
For actually both of the gentlemen who were asking about the question of hiring people in startups, I think the women alluded to it, but there's a specific issue in the startup space with tech startups, with at least me as a minority, and I think it's also true for women. So you talked about the confidence gap, but there's also like another side of that, which is risk taking. And I'll speak for myself. I worked for IBM out of college. I chose to go there rather than Silicon Valley because to me that seemed really risky. Like a startup seems really risky. IBM has been around forever. Like coming from my background in LA, my parents were like, go work for IBM. So that's and I had friends who worked for startups for a decade who like tried to convince me to go work for startups by coming more money. They were working on way cooler stuff than me, but I thought, that's scary. Like they might go out of business next week. I had a friend who worked for, I've been here now 15 years. He worked for 12 startups in 10 years because they all went out of business. So I'm like, I'm not doing that. It's crazy. Like, and finally I got unhappy, a little bit, just a little bit unhappy at IBM. And someone convinced me to start interviewing with some of the startups. And once I was there, like, it was really exciting, and people were happy to see me, I was happy to see them. I've had a great time since I kind of jumped away, but I guess it would take actual effort by the startups, and this is part of it, the feminist hack, the startup crawl, that kind of stuff, I guess, but like, giving people that comfort that they can even consider you as a candidate, because like, I'll say to me, like, startups, no way, like, that just didn't seem like something that made sense to me. Plus, the program you guys were talking about, like that create the zone of safety, we know about these things. Like, we here in college, like, IBM has programs to make sure that, like, I'm not discriminated against. Even Dell has programs to make sure that, like, if I go work there, they're gonna treat me right. Like, and all you read about and hear about is, like, the bro culture and the frat culture, and so you're like, okay, I'll just stay over here. Like, and that's not your fault, and it's not your fault, like, but it does take a lot of outreach, like it's not because you're not being personally inviting. It's like the whole sector is kind of off limits. That's how it looks to me.
It's definitely a harder sell, for sure, to have somebody take the risk to start, to go into a startup. It is a risk, you're absolutely right, and it's a very hard sell, not one that can't be achieved. It's just going to be harder. It is definitely harder. But relying on those networks and going back and going into the universities and partnerships and things like that, if you can find them, just get ready, you're going to have to sell. I mean, but it's like anything, any company. you have to sell, right? So that's not no surprise.
I'll say, I told the first startup that hired me, I told them no 3 times. Because I was that scared, like stepping away from a big corporate entity. Like,
Yeah,
hey,
it's safe.
yeah.
It's safe. It is safe.
It was the best thing I ever did though.
Yeah, no, it is. Sometimes risk can pay off in a great way. No, you're absolutely right.
So let's take maybe 3 or 4 more questions, and then we'll have time to mingle with each other and speak with our panelists. So, sorry, Frank.
So I have a friend who's graduating in like 5 weeks, and she actually majors in math and minors in computer science. And she was applying for all these jobs, and she got really excited because she went to INWIT, which is an Indiana Women's Conference, and a bank around here wanted her to come down, and so they flew her down for an interview, and she's had like 3 or 4 interviews. And one thing she told me was, I want to work in the tech industry, but I went to this bank and I saw one woman. And I went to all these other places I've seen maybe 2. And she ended up accepting a job at one place that was 5 people, 4 of them. One of them's leaving, and then she's replacing that 5th, but the other 4 are all men. And she basically just chose the one that was closer and male-dominated, but not as many men. What is one thing that you would say to a woman who sees that it's so male-dominated, because she really wanted to come to Texas, but ended up not because of it? What's one thing you would say to them to, I guess, maybe encourage them or give them the confidence to move to a place like that's male-dominated?
I would definitely say that the one thing is, gotta give props to Gina for putting this together and creating a forum and a place for women to network. Oil and gas, tech, they're all male-dominated industries, and sometimes you are the only one on the team. And building that network and that support system, and maybe it's not in your organization, but it can be outside your organization, is critical and very important. And so that would be some advice that I would give to anybody that's going to the team and you kind of feel like the only one is, if you've never felt that, which I'm sure most of the people in this room in some form or shape, you have felt that before. And so it is important to reach out and try to find those that are like you. That would be my one word of advice, is find a group that you could go to, and there are others like you, and it will make it easier for you. And then from that, you've got a network now that you can tap into when you're coming as an opening. You've got a whole network to start referring talent into, so that helps.
Yeah, that's a great point. I would just maybe say there are so many resources for women in technology in Austin. We're really fortunate here to have a great community. So, if I were that bank, I would want to be communicating that to everyone who's applying, right? It's great here.
Great. I noticed that there was a lot of emphasis on finding and retaining top talent, but I'd like to flip the discussion on that. Something I spend a lot of time thinking about is how do you create environments that are supportive of growing talent inside? Like you don't necessarily go out and say optimize for best talent. And one reason I worry about that is because there are a great deal of privileges that white males experience in the social structures leading up to that. So very often you will frequently see them as they might have more skills or may have had more experiences to acquire skills. So I wonder, what do you all think about that? What do you think about, instead of optimizing for finding and retaining the talent, creating a culture where you can grow that talent?
Yeah, I think that's a fabulous point, and we haven't really talked about that, but we pay a lot of attention to that. I'm sure you guys do, because when somebody's in the door, it's a lot easier to get your hooks on him, right? Rather than to go out and find somebody else just like that. I will say, for example, the earlier example I gave of the women who came in a fairly junior role 6 years later is probably one of our most senior developers, right? So you are going to progress, and I think that if you're doing a good job, no matter how junior you are, people are incredibly incented in this talent market to keep you and to develop you. So we do a tremendous amount on developing and training our employees that show promise, across the board. But, you know, definitely seek places out. But I do feel like, especially in the tech community, there's a lot of emphasis in keeping the talent that you've got.
Yeah, I think that the growth part of it's essential. And so we have a program that we go through with our employees called Owning Your Own Career. Because I do believe that managers have an obligation to help employees develop, but managers can't read an employee's mind and know what they want to do next. Or, you know, and sometimes managers are like, well, this person's so valuable in this job that, you know, it would really pain me to have them go do something else, which is something that we're like, okay, let's solve that problem, make sure that we don't have a single point of failure, and then that person can go explore something else. So I think that a good way to think about it in terms of your own companies, your own careers, is to say, what is my year going to look like, and to set sort of a plan, and to say, I want to work on these types of projects, or, you know, I want to lead more meetings, or I want to have some speaking opportunities, you know, whatever will sort of take you out of your comfort zone, and will, you know, if you say, okay, well, this is where I want to go, what do I need to do to get there, and to have some of those conversations with the manager, or, you know, with your employee in a productive way, and say, hey, I'm not asking for a raise, I'm not asking for a promotion today, but I want to be building toward what that is in 18 months or 24 months, or, you know, whatever the appropriate time frame is. And I think that having reasonable expectations around that and doing, you know, growing skills is really exciting. It's very rewarding, you know, to learn a new skill, or to be able to leverage a new skill, or to do things differently. And that's the fun part of being in a company that's large enough. You know, you can say, okay, well, you know, I'll go, you know, do this for a while, or, you know, work on the customer support phones as a manager, even if I've been in finance. You know, there are a bunch of different things where skills are transferable, that comes to like, hey, wow, that's pretty cool. You know, that's, you know, neat to learn about the business, and to learn about the customers, and to learn about the products in a different way.
I just want to add this on, because most of you raise your hand that you're a startup, and I think it's a lot easier for the large companies because there's lots of money and they have all this resource. And if you can create a culture that is a learning organization early on, because you may be a startup now and you're thinking, oh, I've got 5 to 10 employees. I was at Rackspace and we were growing more than 50% each month. So we were hiring over 100 and something people per month. We didn't know that was going to happen. It was like a blink of an eye, and somebody had just turned the hose on full blast, and we went 100 miles an hour in an instant. And didn't even expect that to happen. And it was a very fun ride when it was happening, very exciting. But if you can create this culture, this learning organization culture early on, it's a lot easier, because it can happen to you too. And I hope that it happens to most of you that are in startups, that in a blink of an eye, all of a sudden you're like, remember when we had 8 people and now we have like 300? I really hope that happens to everyone in this room. But if you can create that culture, whether it's, you know, I work in a very large organization, we have 8,000 employees, and there are still some managers that don't value growing and learning. And there'll be employees that say, can I go to this conference? My manager said that I couldn't, but, you know, I'm just wondering, is there funds in the D&I space that I could go attend this culture? And I'm going, the manager told you couldn't go. And so it's creating that learning organization. It's even open for them to go to a seminar, or go up the road to go hear a panel. I mean, just that support system that's in there, if you can build that early. Because I will tell you, when we were at Rackspace, it just happened so fast, and it was very hard for us to fill our senior level technical roles. It is so much easier to find your entry level talent, and it's a problem that you don't want to have down the road. You want to be able to grow your talent so that your senior levels are people that were there with you, that are fit for the culture, they've been vetted, you know they're loyal and they're hard workers and they're high performers, and put them in your higher level roles and fill those entry level talent, right? It's so much easier to get people from college that are coming right out than it is to get your level 3, your engineers. It's so much tougher. So if you can build that learning organization early, it'll help you solve a lot of problems in the future.
I just want to add one thing to that from, again, a really tiny company perspective. I really appreciate it when people take charge of their own development too, and connect it to the company value, right? So there are people who will come and say, hey, I've been thinking about our data integration issues, and I think we need to build up skills in this. Like, I'd love to take a 3-day training. Would that be okay? Right? And you're connecting it to what I need, right? Because sometimes this development and training thing becomes all about what people are really interested in. And while I would love to be able to fund that, in a small organization, that's not realistic. So if you're coming to me and saying, hey, here's how I can solve a challenge for the company, or wow, I've been really impressed with this architect and I'd love to get a little bit of time, like, can I jump on this project and really help out the team, right? Things like that, or can I go to that conference, not because I find it interesting, but I think 5 of our customers are gonna be there, and I can set up these meetings, and maybe we could, right? So trying to connect it to that and just being proactive and taking charge, I think is really effective in a small company context.
Yeah.
Let's take one final question. The very back.
So when I was a job candidate, I felt like I was suffering from lack of information. You know, I would look at a company and say, they're offering this much money, they have this diversity, they have this vacation policy, like, what should I expect? Do you guys have recommendations for resources locally where you can kind of compare things besides just like idle gossip?
I think Glassdoor is in the idle gossip category, but there's also sort of CEO reviews, and you can tell what some of the trends are, you know, by looking at that. I think that looking at LinkedIn and seeing what the tenure of people's are, I mean, if people stayed there for a long time, it probably means that they like it and they feel valued. And then really paying attention to the behaviors that you observe in the interviews are important. If the interviewer is interrupting you, if they're late, if they don't look at you when they're when they're asking you questions, they don't, ask you anything other than, sort of how to, do some regression analysis, and that's, they're not valuing, the whole conversation. And you can sense those things. So my advice would be to lay it all out and to think about what you value relative to the money and the vacation and, what people say on LinkedIn. I mean, email people on LinkedIn and say, hey, you work there, do you like it? Would you recommend it to somebody just out of school, somebody like this? And chances are good you'll hit the jackpot. And if 3 people say yes, then they're speaking from, their own experience, and they'll tell you.
I was just going to say the same thing. I have candidates email me all the time asking about it, and I love to answer. I'm a very honest person, so I'll tell you exactly what it's like, and so I was supposed to say that. Find research, go on LinkedIn and find somebody that's in a similar role or something, and you never know. And you may get a response, and they'll get a very candid answer and a realistic idea of what it's like in the organization.
I will say, do not look at Glassdoor. Because what we found, so this is what we found was that we have a pretty aggressive manage-out policy. So we are a pretty high-performance company, and we do counsel people out really regularly. And
they write
about
reviews.
6 months ago, we noticed that, like, literally the people that we had fired had gone on Glassdoor, and we were like, we could tell, like, just by what they had written, we're like, oh, that's, so-and-so. And so I think people have gotten wise to that, and there are either people who are like us, not wise to it, where, the people who've been fired go up, write reviews, or people who are actively managing their Glassdoor reputations, which is not really reflecting what the culture inside the company is. So we're kind of seeing those two ends of the continuum, and not a very honest reflection of what that culture is like. But I think both of what you guys said is reach out to people who are actually in that company now, and productively working there, not getting fired from there, and ask them what it's like.
I'll definitely say, read it with a grain of salt, because I can tell you some of the organizations I work for, and I go read the reviews, I still get Glassdoor updates on some of the companies I work for, they're spot on. So read it with a grain of salt. Some are spot on, and some are, some employees that are a little upset and bitter and are writing things that are situational. So definitely read it with a grain of salt. I will tell you, if you're interviewing that company, if you go read those reviews, ask questions based on the reviews.
Yes.
And determine it for yourself.
It's like Yelp.com, but more.
Yeah, exactly.
Right, but Glassdoor is not the only social media. I mean, companies put things out on YouTube all the time. I mean, these are company events, these are CEO speeches. Everybody's got a flip cam or, their iPhone, and they're taking videos at the sales conference. I mean, do you want to be at the sales conference where people are doing yoga and people are doing ropes courses? Or the one where they have, naked people, sort of, skinning through, the slip and slide. You choose. But that's what you're gonna get. And social media is everywhere, and you just have to, you find it. It's true about candidates also. So if you don't want the picture of yourself on the slip and slide, being found by an employer, make sure that it's not up there.
Well, I just want to take a second and acknowledge Carly from WeWork in the back who helped us get this beautiful
Sorry
space.
for my delay. Yes, everyone, welcome to WeWork. Like she said, I'm Carly, the community manager here. We're so happy to have you guys here. Just so you all know, we've only been open since February 16th, and this is maybe our 5th women's group here. So we're a very good resource as well. We work with She Says, Women Who Hack, Women in Tech, ATX. So we're really excited to bring in all kinds of groups and meetups into our space. And we try to post them on Meetup, and we're new to town, but we're getting there, but we are supportive. And if you have any questions, you want to host your Meetup here, or you want to continue this discussion, we are an event space that's open to groups such as this. So thank you guys so much. Sorry I was a little late, but super informative, and we really appreciate you being here. So yeah, any questions about WeWork co-working space? Paula at me.
Well, we'd really like to thank WeWork for sponsoring the event, and thank you to our panelists for their time.